Kids Free
Back again!
Let me show special nose.
Book first.
Okay. So I'm controller. And I got Mummy's thing.
The Fat Controller.
And I got this Mummy's thing.
Yes. Now tonight we're working our way through the Thomas the Tank Engine books. And look on the... What number's this say on the... This is the spine of the book. What number's that? 50.
50.
50. This is the spine. Like this. We have a spine in our body here. A spine. See, feel that? That's your spine. You've got a bone.
Have you got a spine?
You've got a spine too.
Have you?
Yeah, I've got a spine. And you've got a spine. And this is called the spine of the book.
And that's
Feel it.
And that is the spine as well.
No, that's not the spine, darling. The back of the book, where it's bound, is called the spine. Say spine.
Let's just do it ready.
Say spine.
Spine.
Spine. Right.
Let me show your nose.
Mow wham. Mow wham.
So, let me
Now,
show.
one of these is mine, isn't it? Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want a green one and I want a pink one.
We've got pink, we've got green and orange. Which one do you want? We've got to give one to Dada.
That one.
Lovely, just the one that I don't like. There we go. It's a bit like bubble gum, but it's not.
This one does. This one looks like a Moab. This one is lovely.
A Fat Controller. This is a story about me. Sir
Yeah.
Topham Hatt, or the Fat Controller, as my engines call me. I've loved trains ever since I was a boy, but engines are sometimes as troublesome as trucks. To the trains. One morning, the Fat Controller was eating his usual breakfast of toast and marmalade. Lady Hatt was pouring him a cup of coffee when the telephone rang. Diddling, 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 diddling. Bother that telephone, said the Fat Controller, frowning. I'm sorry, my dear, he said to Lady Hatt. A few minutes later, the engines are not behaving themselves. I must go at once. Engines on my railway do as they're told.
Do you like that one?
Not really. When he arrived at the main station, there was a tremendous noise. The passengers waiting on the platform were angry. The Fat Controller
You want to smell it?
went into his office and sat down behind his desk.
I need to smell this.
Let me help you unwrap it. It's easy when you know how.
Smell them.
Moments later, the station master knocked on the door. There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking. There's no train and the passengers are saying that this is a bad railway. Indeed, said the Fat Controller. We cannot allow that. At the sheds, the Fat Controller found Gordon, James and Henry looking very cross. Come along, Henry. It's time your train was ready, said the Fat Controller firmly. Henry's not going, said Gordon. We won't shunt like common tank engines. This is Thomas's job. We are important tender engines. Fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt, huffed Henry. Oh, indeed, said the Fat Controller. We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they're told. And he hurried away in his car off to find Edward.
I smell this.
Well, no, they're listening to the story, darling, same as you. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left to run his branch line, he thought sadly, and he took out a handkerchief to mop his brow. Now that's your brow. Your brow.
Brain.
Brow.
My brain.
Brow.
Brown and brain.
Yes. Your brain is in there, isn't it? Meanwhile, Edward was shunting. Leave those trucks, please, Edward, said the Fat Controller. I want you to push coaches for me in the yard. Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change, said Edward happily. That's a good engine. Off you go, then. So Edward found coaches for Gordon, James and Henry, and that day the trains ran as usual. But the next morning Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. Bless me, said the Fat Controller. What a noise.
Who's that?
That's Gordon. Sorry, that's Gordon, that's Edward.
Edward's that.
They all hiss me, sir, sighed Edward.
Edward.
They sat tender engines don't shunt.
Edward is at my nursery.
Yes, and that I have dirty wheels like the trucks. I haven't, have I, sir? You have nice blue ones, Edward, said the Fat Controller kindly. Tender engines do shunt, but we need another tank engine here.
Who is that?
That's the Fat Controller.
Who's that?
That's James. The Fat Controller went to the workshop and inspected all sorts of engines. At last, he saw a little green tank engine with 4 wheels. That's the one, he thought. The Fat Controller knew a really useful engine when he saw one. If I choose you, will you work hard, he said. Oh, yes, sir, peeped the little green engine. That's a good engine. I'm going to call you Percy, smiled the Fat Controller. And he drove him all the way back to the yard. Now that's Percy. Edward, he called, here's Percy. Will you show him what we do? Percy soon learned what needed doing, and he and Edward had a happy afternoon. Then Henry steamed by, hissing as usual. Whoosh, 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 little Percy hissed back. Henry was so surprised he almost jumped off the track.
The slots.
The next day the Fat Controller arrived. Edward, Thomas and Percy were excited. He told the engines that Henry, Gordon and James were sulking. They refused to shunt like common tank engines, so I have to shut them in the shed. I want you to run the line for a while. Common tank engines indeed, snorted Thomas. We'll show them, and Percy will help too. Please stop. Thank you, sir, whistled Percy with delight. Edward and Thomas worked the main line, peeping to each other as they passed by. Percy puffed along the branch line, carrying passengers to the stations. Thomas was worried about Annie and Clarabelle, but his driver and guard promised to look after them. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the three naughty engines were being taught a lesson. In the shed, Gordon, James and Henry were cold, lonely and miserable.
Who's that?
Gordon, James and Henry. There was no coal for them, no washdown, and they missed the passengers. They wished they hadn't been so silly.
Like Mr. Silly.
Yes, like Mr. Silly. The next morning the Fat Controller visited the shed.
Like Mr. Rude.
Yeah, he could see that the engines had learnt their lessons. "We're all sorry, sir," said Gordon. "We were too big for our buffers," added James. "Remember, only really useful engines can work on my railway," said the Fat Controller. He knew just how to handle difficult engines. From that moment on, the three tender engines were never rude to tank engines again. That is the story number 50 of the Fat Controller.
Bye.
Bye.